I'm going to tie up a nice sculpin pattern today. This is Dave Whitlock's Nearnuff Sculpin. There's a number of different sculpin patterns out there. They're all very, very good patterns, but this one is an interesting fly to tie, and it's also very simple. You can, as I'll show you with this video, there's some tying techniques that he incorporated in this that does make it a little bit longer to tie and a little bit more involved, especially if you're going to paint the dumbbell eyes on here. But you don't have to, and you can streamline this a little bit, and these flies can be tied fairly quickly. But this is the Nearnuff Sculpin. It's a very, very basic, simple pattern. This is how the fly will ride in the water. It'll ride hook point up. So this is what it would look like, and what you're looking for is a nice broad profile up near the head that tapers on down to a broad tail in the back. So that's the Nearnuff Sculpin, and we'll go ahead and get started tying. We'll start the Nearnuff Sculpin by placing our hook in the vise. This is a Tiemco 5263 hook in a size 4. Generally size 6s and 4s is what I tie these in for smallmouth. Might do 6s and 8s for trout. I'm going to go ahead and debarb the hook. As I mentioned in the introduction, Dave Whitlock does a number of different things on this fly that you don't see too often. Some different tyers do these things. Some are even kind of older traditional things that you don't see done much these days. And one of them is that he files the finish off of the hook. This is basically a lacquer coating that's on the outside of the steel hook to make it more corrosion resistant. But a lot of tyers don't think that the material actually clings to that, or even the thread clings to the lacquer that well. So they'll take a file and they'll just make it rough, go ahead and go all along that shank, getting that lacquer finish off, and this is going to rough up the hook shank a little bit more, and the thread and the materials will cling to it better. It does take away some of the corrosion resistance to it, but to all things there are pluses and minuses. I'm going to use two different kinds of thread for this fly. The first one that I'm using is a Wapsi UTC 210 in a brown color. You could use a flat wax nylon if you want, or like a Fly Masters Plus. But the primary reason is it's a thicker thread. I'm going to be going up and down the hook shank here for the first steps, and this will allow me to go from one end of the hook shank to the other a little bit quicker. Attach my thread just about a half an eye length behind the eye of the hook. I'm going to run my thread down the length of the hook shank. This is just putting a nice base layer of thread along the hook shank to grip the hook shank and give a nice base for the materials. And advance my thread back forward. I'm not that concerned about these being perfect touching turns, because again, I'm not trying to keep necessarily a smooth body as much as give the fly a nice base. I'm going to stop an eye length behind the eye of the hook. Another thing that Dave Whitlock does on this fly is he uses some hard monofilament as a means of broadening the profile of the hook. This is a sculpin. Most sculpins tend to be flat and more horizontal because they're always on the bottom. So he's going to use some monofilament. I've seen other tyers use toothpicks and even just lead if they're wanting to add some more weight to it. But we're going to go ahead and use some hard mason. This is a monofilament, which is a 0.022 diameter. It's about a 20-pound monofilament. What we're going to do, this is already pre-cut in about a 2-inch length. I'm going to fold it over, and this is basically already set up for this size hook, what I'm looking for. So I'm going to fold this over, and I'm going to set this right up onto the hook. I want the point of it, or the end of it where it's doubled over, to be about a half an eye length behind the eye of the hook. And I'm going to need that space for finishing off the fly. So right behind that, I'm going to set this hard mason up here, and I'm going to tie this in. The idea is you get a few wraps on this and start to secure this down, and then just start winding down the hook shank. I like to keep my fingers going along the hook shank and the mono, just to keep it so that it does not get pulled over and around the hook shank. You want to keep it nice and flat, and you're going to go all the way down to the end of the shank. If some of it does get moved, say twisted, like this, as you're wrapping that in, at this point you can simply just push all that back up to make certain that you get that nice and horizontal along the hook shank. If one side is a little bit longer here, which is the case here, you can just reach in with your scissors and go ahead and cut that a little bit shorter. Then I'm going to go back up. You can, if you want to, go back and forth a couple of times to add some layers to this, just to secure it if you want. I generally find going down and back up is enough, especially with that base layer of thread underneath. Once I have that secured in place and on both sides, I'm ready to tie in the eyes of our fly. Now the eyes of this are just a typical lead dumbbell eye, but he prefers to paint his kind of unique, actually. You don't see these commercially available, but you could use just regular commercially available painted dumbbell eyes. Whether you want to use the yellows, the whites, the reds, that's up to you. It depends on the body color of the fly. But these are made fairly simple. Like I said, they're just a regular unpainted medium dumbbell eye. You start out with a layer of black latex, and then on top of that, you're going to use a small dowel rod or a toothpick to put some yellow on, some white, and then a smaller dot of yellow and a smaller dot of black to make the eyes. And then these are coated with a 30-minute epoxy. You could use a UV resin if you want. I prefer the epoxy. I would not use the 5-minute epoxy because of the fact that that will yellow over time. Even if it's not out in the sun, just sitting in your box, eventually they will kind of get a yellowish brown tint to them. The 30-minute does not. And if you have like a 10-hour epoxy, a rod wrapping epoxy or something, that's even better. But the epoxy coating simply helps the paint, helps the eyes be more durable as they're banging around on the bottom of the river, and they will last longer. So I'm going to tie in the dumbbell eyes right here just behind where the monofilament's folded over. Just using some standard crisscross wraps here. I'll tie those in. And then I'm going to wrap around underneath the eyes and above the monofilament and the hook shank, just to cinch those in very well. As you can see, I've got these right up on top. I've got my base for the body in place, and I have plenty of room up here to finish this off and give it a nice little nose at the end of the fly. Now at this point, I'm going to go ahead and tie off the 210 denier. I like to coat all of this with some head cement. I'm using some Fly Tight here. You could use whatever your preferred head cement is. That's going to soak down in around those threads and everything and just help that to reinforce that a little bit. Don't be surprised if when this dries, you have a little bit of a white coating on the outside of it. I think what that is the wax that is in the thread. Because this is an alcohol-based, it dissolves the wax and then sinks in, and the wax rises, and then it dries, and you end up with kind of just a little white coating on it. You do not have to wait for that head cement to dry to go ahead and proceed with the fly. I'm going to go ahead and attach my second bit of thread. This is a Uni-Thread 8.0 in a brown. I'm going to attach this right behind the eye of the hook and just run this down in some open spirals down along the hook shank to tie in our tail. Hackles that are used in the Whitlock Nearnuff Sculpin are basically just hen saddle hackles. You can buy different necks. Whiting has a number of them that are really, really nice. This is a Keo hen soft hackle neck. What you're looking for are some feathers that are going to, down near the bottom, that are going to have some kind of nice rounded tips. It depends on how pointed you want or how blunted you want. The tails on sculpins tend to be kind of wide. It helps them scoot around the bottom a little bit quicker. So you're looking for that, but then you're also looking for some longer feathers up here at the top of the neck, and these are going to be used to spiral or palmer around the body to, here I'll show you what we're going to use here. These are going to be used to palmer around the body for just a larger profile of our sculpin. So picking out 2 feathers from that saddle, they don't have to be perfect feathers. Even if they have some defects, that's fine. We're going to take the 2 feathers and we're going to put them concave side in so that they are nice and flat like this. Then I'm going to strip away all the other fibers. I want to have a tail. It's going to be somewhere about 2/3 the length of the hook shank. So I just like to strip away those fibers, and then I'm going to tie these in right on top of the hook shank. I want to tie these in so that they are vertical, just like that. Go ahead and wrap those down real well because we don't want those shifting around. Don't worry if you get a few hackle fibers in there. This is a fly that the buggier it is, the better. So that's one of the nice things about the Nearnuff Sculpin is it does not have to be perfect. If you have some hackles sticking out or the dubbing's a little bulky in different areas or whatever, it tends to work very well. Now I'm going to tie in the hackle that I'm going to use for palmering in the body, and this is going to be tied in by the tip because we want the longer fibers right here up behind the dumbbell eyes, so we end up with a tapered profile that's going to be a little narrower at the base of the tail and getting wider as we get up around the eyes and the head of the fly. So I'll secure those in. Again, to make this a little bit more solid, I'm going to just put just a dab of head cement right here, soaks down in, helps hold that together a little bit. Then we can go ahead and dub our body. Now for dubbing on this, I'm actually using some Whitlock's SLF, simply because he has some that's already blended together, or I should say Wapsi has some they've already blended together in the right colors. This is a Nearnuff Sculpin Golden Brown. And the SLF is essentially just synthetic living fiber is what it stands for. And it is some rabbit, and I think there might be some acrylic in here, but and some flash, like an ice dove or something like that, a little bit in there to give it a little bit of flash. But it's just a nice blend of different materials, that's all. But he does do an interesting dubbing technique on this, and you can certainly use your standard dubbing technique of twisting the dubbing around the thread to build your body up. But he does something that's very interesting that you don't see too many people do. First time I saw this, I was introduced to this years ago, and the person who was showing me, he had seen it at an actual facility where production tires were tying, and he referenced it as speed dubbing. But basically what you're doing is you're taking this dubbing, this SLF blend, you're going to twist some of it onto the thread, and then you're going to move that up to the fly. And then the rest you're just going to hold in your hand, and as you come around, it will twist around the thread and around the body, and by slowly pulling back and letting more dubbing go, you can get a nice tapered body fairly quick. Now this isn't as quick because I'm trying to show you and explain this, but actually once you get this process down, it really is fairly quick to do, but it does take some practice. So if it's something that interests you in doing, then I would suggest you go ahead and give that a try and stick with it. After a few dozen flies, you'll start to get the hang of it a little bit. It does get kind of tricky. However, if you are going to do this dubbing technique, the fibers have to be a longer fiber dubbing. If you've got something real short for small scuds and sow bug nymphs or something like that, it's just too short, it won't work. So it has to be a longer fiber dubbing. So anyway, now we have our body dubbed. At this stage, we're going to tie in our Krystal flash accent. Sculpins are not known to be very flashy critters, but at the same time, just a little bit of flash can help. So what I'm going to do is just take a couple of strands. This is a copper and black flash accent. You can just use a regular copper or gold or something like that if you want. Something to complement the overall color of the fly. I'm going to bring it to one side, and I'm going to shorten that down so it just extends a little bit past the tail, not much. I'll get a wrap in here to secure it, bringing them around the eyes to bring them over to the other side. I'll then tie those in to secure them. And then I'll clip those so that they're just a little bit longer than the tail. You don't have to tie in your flash accent in this manner, and you don't have to even tie it in the way Dave Whitlock is doing it here in regards to tying it up here. You can do this a little bit different if you want, whatever you're comfortable with. But with this method, what we're doing is we're tying it in up by the eyes, but then we're going to anchor it in with the hackle as we start to palmer the hackle around. Again, you don't have to do this technique if you don't want to, but now we're just going to take that feather and we're going to palmer this around. I don't like to put a whole lot of wraps in here. I get maybe that's even a little bit too close. So I'm going to spread these out just a little bit more. Because again, I'm trying to get more of a broader profile, and that's all. Plus, when I get up here, I usually like to get to the longest fibers on the hackle, and then palmer that and some of the webby fibers right behind the eye. So again, this is one of those flies that you can get a little bit messy with, and you don't have to worry about being too persnickety about things as long as you're getting the overall shape of the fly. So with the hackle palmered in, I'll secure it right behind the eyes here. And as you can see, when this is going to be in the water, this is going to give me a nice tapered profile right down here to the tail. So the next step, we're going to take some more of our dubbing. I'm using our speed dubbing technique, if that's what you want to call it. We're going to dub around the dumbbell eyes. I want to not only cover up the thread wraps around the dumbbell eyes, but I want to build this up a little bit. As I mentioned before, you know, the sculpins are they're very much kind of a bullet shape, and you want them to be a little heavier up in the front, a little bulkier. Once you have that done, we'll bring the thread right up behind the eye of the hook. We'll just secure that. We'll put in a 5 or 6 turn whip finish, or maybe 8 or 9, and we can cut our thread off. Before I put some head cement on here, I like to, as you can see, I've got all the dubbing wrapped around there and it all looks fine, and you could certainly fish this fly this way and it would be just great. But just to smooth it off and make it look a little bit better, I like to take a little dubbing brush here and tease some of those fibers out just so that it doesn't look so wrapped. It'll have a little bit more of a profile to it. Sometimes you get some of those long fibers in that dubbing that actually just come right out, and that's fine. Again, I'm looking for when this is in the water and swimming along the bottom like this, it's going to have just a really nice, chunky, meaty profile to it. So with all that done, we're going to then put some head cement right on those thread wraps, and our Nearnuff Sculpin is complete. Especially in warm water circles, sculpins are really, really good, but there's many good sculpin patterns out there that people use for trout all the time. So this is a golden brown color. You could use an olive. I've even seen these in a gray color. The general idea is you want to find a color that is going to match the substrate of the stream that you're fishing in. These fish will, the color of their skin will actually adapt and change to the different colors of the rocks and the sand and the gravel and the things on the river where they live. It helps to camouflage them. So that's the Nearnuff Sculpin. Some interesting tying techniques in this fly. You don't have to get the lacquer coating off the hook if you don't want to. You don't have to dub this the way he dubbed it, or even paint the eyes the way that he does. But I like to do videos with a lot of these flies when I can and try to keep them the way the author at least did them, or at least how the author recorded them. Like I said, this is on a DVD that you can get along with the Nearnuff crayfish for some Whitlock flies. And that's how he did it on the DVD. Now, a lot of times fly tyers will come up with patterns and they put them together in one method, but as time goes by, they refine it and it changes. And you certainly aren't locked into turning around and tying and creating this fly this way. As long as you got the pieces and parts in and the profile done, it will fish well, and the Nearnuff Sculpin is definitely a good fly pattern to have in your box. Thanks for joining me at the Vise today. I hope you learned at least a new pattern, if not a new technique, maybe a tip or trick here and there. If you have any questions about this fly or any of the techniques used in constructing this pattern, please leave them in the comments section down below. If you go to the trouble to ask a question, I'll go to the trouble to answer it. If you'd like to help dressed irons, please share this video with your friends and anybody you think that might enjoy this pattern. Until next time, remember, it's fly tying. If you're not having fun, then you're doing it wrong.